So here to share her research on trauma and resilience is Donna Jackson Nakazara. Are you here yet, Donna? Okay, so Donna is an award-winning science journalist. She's the author of 7 books and an internationally recognized speaker whose work explores the intersection of neuroscience, immunology, and human emotion. Her books include Girls on the Brink, Helping Our Daughters Thrive in an era of increased anxiety, depression, and social media. They're published by Random House and Harmony. And this month, Girls on the Brink was just published and has been released this month. In addition, she's authored The Angel and the Assassin, the tiny brain cell that changed the course of medicine, which was named one of the best books of 2020 by Wired magazine. Childhood Disrupted, which I mentioned earlier, was a finalist for Books for a Better Life Award and The Last Best Cure. Her writing has appeared in Wired, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and Health Affairs. She's a regular speaker at universities, including the Harvard Science Library Series, UCLA, Rutgers University, Children's Hospitals Association, Johns Hopkins University, Learning in the Brain, and the University of Arizona. So welcome, Donna, and thank you for making time to meet with us today. Your latest book, Girls on the Brink, was just released a week ago, and I know your calendar is very filled with speaking engagements around the country. So we're really grateful that you've taken a few moments to speak with us here. And at the Relationship Foundation, we were profoundly moved by Childhood Disrupted, and we're very much looking forward to reading and studying Girls on the Brink. And we have a number of questions to ask you. And if anybody attending has a question, please click the raise your hand icon. Our first question is, the mental health of girls today is pretty stark, according to research. Can you walk us through some of the recent findings and set the landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. Just so you know, I'm still seeing your screen share, and I don't know. Okay, thank you. That'll be easier for me so I can see the participants. Thank you for having me. I think first of all and foremost, beyond all things, thank you for the work that all of you do. As somebody who writes books in my attic for several years and then goes through a Blitz book tour, much of which now is virtual, so it's weird. You guys are the ones out there making change happen. So just a deep bow of gratitude for you all. So to answer your question, Michael, yeah, so we are seeing a pandemic among girls in terms of mental health. And to be clear, it's affecting all youth, right? Wherever youth are on the gender spectrum, boys, LGBTQ, of course, especially girls of color, BIPOC girls. But as we look at the statistics, we have known long before the pandemic that girls, once they cross over into puberty, have much higher rates of depression and anxiety. This is something that we've known epidemiologically for a really long time. Even before the last 2 years happened, we knew that 1 in 4 girls suffered from symptoms of major depression, compared with fewer than 1 in 10 boys. And depression is now striking girls earlier than ever. We'll talk about that a little bit more, often by age 11 or 12 or 13. By age 17, this was in 2019, 1/3 of girls reported that they had experienced during adolescence an episode of major depression. And listen, this was not just being upset about a breakup or final exams. This was a period marked by hopelessness and fatigue and a loss of interest in their activities. So we also know, thanks to the CDC and Johns Hopkins Health, that girls are on average 48% more likely to suffer from depression compared with boys. And girls also have a 43% higher rate of anxiety disorders. So there's a lot going on there. The pandemic kind of poured gasoline on an already raging fire, if you will. I'm a science journal. We love analogies. And during 2021, the CDC reported that suicide attempts had risen 51% among girls compared to 4% among boys. So we've long known that puberty is a transition through which girls end up having more depression and anxiety and self-harm. And that trend, that gap between boys and girls' mental health is widening. It's worse now than ever. It doesn't mean boys aren't also suffering. Let me just raise my hand here and say I'm the mother of a son and a daughter. I care about all kids, but this needed to be examined. And as we'll get into, as Michael goes on here, there's a reason why we're starting to figure out what's behind this crisis, and it's pretty new and interesting.
Okay, Sarah, I think you had a couple questions.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. First, you wrote that it was only a few years ago that scientists started to look at how stress affects the female brain. Before that, researchers worked with male research models when looking at how the brain processes stress. Why did it take so long to include women in this research? And why do these new findings matter in terms of what's happening with girls' mental health today?
Well, so you all mentioned that I've written a few books. My bailiwick, every science journalist has a bailiwick. Mine is really that intersection of neuroscience and immunology, and really the human heart is the way that I think about it through our lived experience. And I've done a lot of reporting in this area, been a fly on the wall with quite a few neuroscientists and neuroimmunologists around the country. And it's kind of amazing to think that all of that neuroscience was being done on male research models. So let me explain this a little bit for those of you who may not know, and there's no reason why you would know, how research happens. It begins, neuroscience and neuroimmunology begin in preclinical research in animal models. We don't like that, right? In almost every book, I thank the animals because of course we don't like that, but it is how research happens. And without it, we would know very little about depression and anxiety. So we've long had this epidemiology that I just talked about a minute ago, but we haven't really had the mechanisms by which stress across development begins to change the brain and the function of the immune system, which of course plays a role in physical and mental health. What we have known, and I've reported on across several books now, right, has been done in male research models. It's only in 2016 that the NIH requested that researchers consider consider sex differences in preclinical and translational research. And we all know that preclinical research is what leads to translational research, and it really decides what happens in clinical research, right? So whether it was how stress affects the developing brain, the immune system, puberty, changes in the brain and depression, anxiety, PTSD, or even the way that the brain and the immune system chat with each other in mental health and interface in the development of mental health disorders, it was all being done in these male research models. And the study of female biology was largely left out of it. As one researcher told me when I just scratched my head about this, as any of us might, researchers wanted to keep those pesky hormones out of it. And it turns out, you won't be surprised, just as we found when we began to look at female research models in heart disease or anything else, there are differences in how, especially during puberty, unmitigated and unrelenting stress affects the female brain. So it felt really, really important to me to write this book now, as we're seeing these rising numbers about how our girls are not okay. And this science, which is largely being done by a group of kick-butt female neuroscientists around the country, to look at how unrelenting, unmitigated stress affects the developing female brain, health and well-being, and gives us kind of a new picture, I think, of the understanding of the neurobiology of puberty, which is something we really haven't understood with with the female brain in mind previously.
Great. I was also another question. In your book, Girls on the Brink, you suggested that we're living through an era that's toxic for girls. I was just wondering what makes you say that and why that's so important to write in this book now.
Yeah, well, I think Michael spoke to that a little bit, and but we know obviously that a child's sense of safety across childhood and into puberty and adolescence has a tremendous effect on his or her long-term well-being. I think we can all agree on that. I think I've written a few books about it. And a lot is happening during the brain at this time, right? It's a really critical window in neurodevelopment. And as most of you know, there's a lot of rewiring that goes on during puberty, or what neuroscientists like to call firing and wiring and pruning. So girls at this age feel a lot more pressure than they used to. Like all kids, of course, there's this greater focus on performance and competition, higher expectations academically, a focus on extracurriculars. And now we've brought in this focus on appearance, which has long been there, especially for females, for girls. But now it's amplified 24/7 by being liked or disliked or critiqued or evaluated, having comments that, you're too fat, you're too thin, not just the kinds of misogynistic or early over sexualization that women have always faced as they come into puberty, but ramped up in this 24/7 cycle that is social media, which they can never quite get away from. And it's become very personal, right? Like these are personal likes, dislikes, critiques. Girls get more critiques online when they're on social media than boys do. They get more critiques from girls and boys and from men. So all of this you all have already talked about is against this backdrop of a looming growing sense of chronic unsafety that our kids are experiencing for all the reasons you mentioned, school shootings, climate change. The world is just heating up environmentally, socially, politically, and social media takes all that and gins it up in an algorithm to bring out more emotional reaction from all of us. There's also a excessive sexualization of very young girls now, starting at a very, very young age on social media. And we've really, as a society, blurred the line between being a girl and being a woman, and asking girls, especially on these platforms, to sexualize themselves as if they're already women long before the brain is ready for it. And again, all of this is happening at a really, really important time and a vulnerable time in girls' brain development. They cannot put all this in context at such a young age. So at puberty, the brain is kind of like a computer system. If you've ever played chess online, it's kind of like a chess game online where it's factoring in all past adversity, all past moves on the chessboard, right? And all the adversity or moves that are happening in that moment. To put it another way, all the stressors you've ever faced in your life. And it rewires based on that intelligence, the brain, just like a computer chess game. It decides what it has to prepare for, how scary the world is going into is based on all of that intel. And here is where, because this is what we're really talking about here, where we begin to see differences emerge in girls' health. During puberty, estrogen comes on board. And we'll delve into that a little bit. Estrogen is this incredibly wonderful thing that, comes in. It's a master regulating hormone during puberty. We think of it as associated with, that moods or the thrum of excitement, but it's so much more than that. It regulates how the brain will wire and fire up during puberty. It helps neurons to fire and wire and connect together, and it helps with healthy brain development. But it also does something else. Estrogen has this evolutionary advantage. It allows the female across development to be able to do everything that the male body can do, but traditionally being physically smaller. Our organs are literally smaller. We also have to make room for, a uterus and if possibly even carrying a child. And estrogen gives us this amped up response to stressors and environmental threats because we need to be able to do everything in smaller bodies with smaller organs, 17, 18 hours a day, even though we have this smaller body. And estrogen allows us to do that, but it can turn to a disadvantage. So to talk about its advantages, women, for instance, if we talk about the pandemic, have a more robust vaccine response, right? It's also the reason why women are more likely to get long COVID. So there is this yay for estrogen. It helps protect the female body, but there is this nay for estrogen because when there is unrelenting or too much stress or too many environmental hits, it can turn into a negative, increasing the stress response. And that increases the immune response. And so I want to be very clear here that this is only in the face of unmitigated, unrelenting stress. Without unmitigated and unrelenting toxic stress, the female adolescent brain is just a powerhouse. It is super pliable and full of promise and potential and, agile thinking. That corpus callosum is bigger in the female, connecting the left and right brain. And what I'm talking about here today cannot be underscored enough, is only in the face of unrelenting stress. And that makes us turn our attention to the fact that girls routinely face additional social and emotional threats just by virtue of being female. And now I'll just add in one more thing. Sorry, I get nerdy into the science here. Puberty is also happening 2 years earlier, even earlier for some girls, right? And this is a real problem because adolescence and that period of time where the brain could wire up that prefrontal cortex, and you had a period of time to figure out how to respond to stressors and put them in context. Adolescence is actually happening after puberty. And that means that with puberty coming in earlier, the brain has not wired and fired up in ways that it knows how to respond to social and emotional threats, or even when to ask for help. So this means if puberty is coming in early and the parts of the brain that put social and emotional distress in their proper context haven't wired and fired up yet, and we've amplified the social and emotional distress girls are feeling, that's a problem. So it really makes sense that we're seeing these rising rates of depression and anxiety in girls.
Thank you, Donna. I'm getting such an education this is so important for, especially for boys and men to hear this. So they, I mean, who teaches us about women other than the things that we hear on the street, which are not in anyone's best interest? I have another question, and before I ask that, I see that Fritzi Hortzman has joined us. Fritzi, did you by any chance, have a question or a comment? We're going to hear from Fritzi a little later in the morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm walking the dog right now, but I'm just amazed at what Donna's been talking about, and this early development, of the female it's distressing, and the brain isn't getting enough time to catch up. So I'll let you guys talk more, but I have a lot of things to add to this conversation. Thanks, Michael.
Sending you a kiss.
Back to you.
Yeah, I just want to mention now that Fritzi has a podcast series, and she interviewed Donna, and I highly recommend that. In fact, some of what we'll be sharing today was taken from that podcast with the two of you. Okay, so I have a last question, and you talk about how we have stolen girls in between years. What do you mean by that? And what are the consequences of that loss for girls?
Right. So, Michael, that plays very closely into everything we're talking about. We used to have this period of time. I myself can say that I experienced it more or less, although we had a enormous family tragedy when I was 12. My father died during a very routine operation. But before that time, many of us can relate to this idea that we had something called middle childhood, and we talk about that as years of 7 to 13. And they were traditionally a period of time where you had space and time to kind of develop emotionally and physically without pressure, without this outside eye, right, as to how well you were doing and how you were looking. And these years are really the bridge between childhood and adolescence. Again, as I said before, an awful lot is happening in the brain during this time, but in so many ways, as a society, even before the pandemic, and more so since, we've really stolen away those years. And we've replaced it with a period of time that's marked by competition and hierarchical structures, whether it's on the playing field or in the classroom, and threat and reward judgments on social media. And again, this early over-sexualization of girls as if they're women. And with fear, cultural fear. We just talked about school shootings and the traumas that we are all living through as a society, whether it's the pandemic or climate change. So familial isolation has also changed things. Families are living far apart from each other, and we don't join together in community in the way we used to. All of these are changing the society we live in. But what's really important here is that they are adding to that allostatic stress load, that stress burden on children and teens at exactly the time when they need added reassurance, a sense of safety that society at large has their back before they go off into this extremely stressful and competitive world on their own. So without that period of middle childhood, or what I call the in-between years in the book, we have again started to erase some of that really crucial time in development where the brain can begin to fire and wire up around a sense of safety. Let's remember, across development, the brain is a detective. It's really asking one crucial question, whether it's at home or in the community or about the world it's going to grow up and take on one day. Am I safe or not safe, right? And when that answer is I'm not safe, the brain begins to make decisions and rewire and prune according to that information in ways that we see on brain scans are associated with depression, anxiety, mood disorders, self-harm, bipolar, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Sarah has one more question. I wanted to, before she asks you, Is there anyone who's attending today that has a question or a comment?
Michael, there is a question in the chat.
Okay. Okay, now I'm a boomer, so I got to figure out where the chat is right now. Sarah, do you see it? Do you want to ask the question, Sarah?
Oh, I think I can answer this. Yeah.
You see it?
Yeah. So I totally agree with the person asking. So I want to speak to thank you for this question. It's really a great one. Someone's asking, is it possible that the numbers are lower among boys because they don't talk about their feelings as much? So I want to speak to that. Of course, as a science journalist, I too had that question, and I tackle it really early on in the book, which you'll see when you read it. And I went to really the leading epidemiologist to answer the question. And what I was told, and makes total sense once you wrap your mind around it, is that, of course, epidemiologists recognize that we can't go by diagnosis when we're looking at the health of children. And what epidemiologists do when they really want to get a picture of our children's health is that they're very specific. They ask children and families a series of questions that have nothing to do with diagnosis. They have to do with shifts in behavior at home, and they include things that we associate with depression and anxiety, like over the past 12 months, has your child lost interest in activities, has shown changes in sleeping, shown all of these other shifts that we associate with depression and anxiety, withdrawn from things that they normally care about, and has this interrupted their daily life? Not just have they shown you, the parent, but has it changed whether they're able to go to school or whether they're able to get out of bed? And has that been true for a series of months? Or have they needed outside support and help? And that's really what many of those numbers are based on, not a diagnosis that requires someone, saying I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but actual shifts in the ability to engage in life in the way that we want to see children and teens engage in life, engage in school, get out of bed. So that's where this picture comes from. But let me go ahead and tell you that we do see that boys' mental health is also suffering. Of course, boys are struggling. How could you be a kid in this world and not be struggling? Of course they are. These are incredibly stressful times for all of our children. So we know that mounting social and environmental stressors lead to increased rates of mental health disorders in boys and not just girls. And we do also know that anxiety disorders in boys can be missed, right? They can be missed and seen as behavioral problems or attention issues. So there is a lot of necessary and needed attention on that as well. We also know neuroscientists have started to look at these differences, and we know that when faced with chronic stress, boys' brains show changes in areas that are more related to anger and attention and impulse control, those regions that we associate with behavioral issues. But at the same time, well, I guess I'll also throw in here, we have really good evidence and some very interesting studies which show that when girls face external threats and stress, they're more likely to do something we call rumination, right? Turn on the self with like thoughts about unworthiness and self-blame. So when we have a lot of toxic stress, it's going to go somewhere. It's going to go inside or outside, right? It's going to inject in, or it's going to go out. And so girls, we can see in the face of unmitigated, unrelenting stress that a part of the amygdala, the left amygdala for the nerds in the room, gets really perfused. We know that that's associated with rumination. And for boys, we don't see quite that same level of rumination, which again is like judging self or others and getting caught up in those those negative thoughts about self. So we might add in here that because we have so much toxic misogyny in our society, that girls are, internalizing some of those messages so that when they face a lot of stress, they're more likely to blame themselves. That said, we are in a society which is so toxic for boys as well. Again, I raised a son and I raised a daughter. I can remember my son coming home in 8th grade and going, I'm not going to be part of this. If it means I can't have a social life, I'm not going to be part of this, where boys are all talking about tits and ass. I hope I can say that. I'm not going to be part of it. I'm not doing it. Even if I have no friends, I will not be part of this. And boys face that environmental threat, that fear of being ostracized or bullied for not being masculine enough, or physically built enough, or powerful enough. So our culture is rife with toxic masculinity. I think it shames boys. I think we all know it shames boys for being unmanly. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean being, sensitive or emotionally responsive or expressive or nurturing or nice to girls, or valuing being respectful to girls and celebrates them for, just look at Twitter, for being, objectifying women in their bodies, sexualizing girls as if they're women, and valuing sexual conquests over connection. But the challenges that girls and boys face really do have distinct root causes. And as we see the rates of mental health disorders in girls skyrocket and this gap continue to widen between girls and boys' mental health, which is something we've seen for a long time, and it's getting worse, folks, this issue for girls is particularly dire. And when we consider that we just started to look at the intersection of stress on the developing female brain, I think it's really important to talk about it. However, I also think helping girls helps boys, and that many of the antidotes in my book, the 15 antidotes, truly, and so many readers have said this to me already, can be applied to raising sons. It would not only help boys if we do that, but it would also be part of the solution for helping girls. Because look, making things right for our girls, or all kids, wherever they are on the gender spectrum, that means making things right for every child, every child. And how we raise sons, of course, impacts the lives of girls and the women they'll become.
Thanks, Donna. Sarah has one last question, but again, before she asks you this, could you, is there anyone who's any of the participants would like to either put in the chat or question or comment directly? Okay, well, Sarah has one last question, and Donna, this is so informative. I hope I've talked to Dr. Filiti about his work and your work. I spoke with him yesterday. So great if your work started to really become widespread, really in schools.
Yeah.
Especially for boys and girls to have a greater understanding about the things you're speaking about the effect of the brain, and how social media, so they can start to really use their critical thinking. How do I want to live my life? And thanks for sharing about your son as well. I'd like to meet him someday. Okay.
He's out in California getting his PhD on ethics and discrimination. So hopefully he'll also be helping the world in his own way.
Okay.
I just have one quick question. So we also believe that a relationship is a strong foundation for resilience. I was wondering how you suggest parents build strong bonds with their children.
Well, so we're all trauma informed here, and I would just have to start by saying you have to look at your own trauma, right? So I wouldn't be the first person to say this, and I've certainly written a ton about it. But we really have so much understanding now that one safe, stable, nurturing relationship is more important than all the factors of adversity. And that means being that safe, stable, nurturing adult, that SSN, if you will, really requires that we're aware of our own trauma. So then in those really tough parenting moments, again, I've raised 2 kids. They happen, I think of them as sort of those kitchen moments. We are able to bring ourselves down. We've done the work to associate what triggers us from the past in the moment. And for all of us that who have had trauma, there is something going on. But if we don't look at that, if we don't know it, if we don't tease it apart, if we don't do our own work as humans, we can't be that good human for the people we love most, which is usually our children. Now, to bring that home, so I have a lot in the book about that, like a whole program and how to do that. But one thing that really stood out to me in the reporting was something that came from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health from researcher there, Christy Bethel. And she is really a strong predictor of a child's well-being is, can this young person, my child, talk to me about anything, no matter how hard? So if we talk about the importance of safe, stable, nurturing connection, or what we might talk about as parental attunement, as being the cornerstone of childhood resiliency, again, creating that means we have to do some work as adults so that in those most difficult parenting moments, we can regulate ourselves first. And offering that up does something really, really crucial. It means that our child knows they can turn to us with a complete sense of psychological safety. What do I mean by psychological safety? They can speak any idea, any feeling, without any fear that we are going to interrupt and judge or make fun of them or jump in even as the detective or the fixer. We are offering psychological safety so that when our child comes to us, or any child with whom we teach or work with, or who is a client in therapy, any child who's coming to us knows that the first thing they're going to get is a state of calm, a state of empathy, a state of attuned listening, so that they feel valued and respected and heard and understood. And guess what that does? We all know what it does. It regulates the nervous system so that a child can continue to talk. And often as parents or educators or people working with children, we actually don't give kids enough time to tell us what's really going on because we don't stop to think about how we're making them feel when they turn to us. How we make them feel when they turn to us is the key. That adolescent brain, the brain coming through middle childhood and into puberty much earlier now, as we said, is wired to be hypervigilant around assessment and evaluation. So we have to be really, really careful throughout childhood and into puberty and adolescence about making comments which make girls feel they're being judged. Look, our society is judging girls 24/7. Their face, their hair, their body, and we're judging all children 24/7. Did you get that prize? Were you first in the class? What grade did you get? How'd you do? Did you score the goal? How are you going to get into college? It's ridiculous. It's so ramped up. So we have to pull back from that sense of extrinsic judgment and evaluation and give kids the time to talk to us in a way that really signifies to them that they are seen and known and valued and that they matter, And that in turn allows them to come to us when really, really terrible things happen and ask for our help and support. And we won't know they need it if we haven't established the groundwork for them to be able to tell us.
Donna, Sarah has a question.
Yeah,
It's come up on the chat.
we do have one question question in the chat from Nicole Reynolds. She was asking if you have any recommendations for building
Well, I
self-esteem.
think when we talk about self-esteem, we really are talking about this crucial relationship. So really kids are getting their sense of self-esteem from the world around them and whether or not they matter. So in the book, we don't have time here today, but I do have 15, like a plan, an expert agreed upon plan to do all of these things broken down, you know, after talking to 20 leading public health experts and neuroscientists. It's hard. It's really hard for me to answer that in 2 minutes. But when we start at the beginning and we're able to establish that safe connection, that parental attunement, and when we raise our children to really have a sense that their value is internal, it's intrinsic, we value them for who they are. They don't need to do anything to be valued. All we're doing is asking that they be a good person, and they already are a good person. That's their job, is to grow up and be a good person, wherever they're coming from, whatever their skills or non-skills are. And that means completely shifting the way that we are with our kids at our homes, in our communities, and in that wider, you know, world at large. So, you know, it's really important that we remember that almost everything that our kids face right now is really coming through that extrinsic value. And there are so many ways we can help them to re-engineer that. Like I talk about in the book, like instead of talking about what you think and telling your kids what they should think, move away from that entire way of seeing the world. Move to, kids are born with a sense of wonder, right? Famous philosopher at Berkeley, Alison Gopnik, talks about how, well, she's drawing upon ancient philosophy, actually, that kids are born with like this lantern-like consciousness. They just take wonder in the world. They see a bird on a limb and the light coming, and it's wonder. And we are more like flashlights. We're like spotlights as adults. Got to get it done. This is what I'm doing. Got to do it now. And we really want to help kids hold on to that lantern-like consciousness, that relational awareness. Like, wow, I wonder what a bird feels like in the rain. I wonder what school is going to be like after the pandemic. Instead of putting so much restraints on how our kids think and should feel, opening that up. I wonder why Harry sent that text with that picture of his body part to Emily, and allowing them to do that internal thinking and that critical thinking that Michael talked about, so that over time they develop their own voice of mattering, that what they think and feel, what they observe matters, while you're also establishing relational awareness. Hey, how do those things make me feel when they happen? And how do I think others feel when they happen? So those are just some of the ways. I can't get to all 15, but that's just a little handful.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Donna. We're going to take a brief break, but before we do that, I'd like everybody to make a note, and you can spell Donna's name, because if you go to her website, you can see all of the books that she's published and her new book, Girls on the Brink. And yeah, so it's just so you spell her name right, Nakazawa. You'll find it, her website. Tremendous information is there, and we're going to keep following your work, Donna, and it's so great that you've come on at this level, at this time, when there's really just so much at stake for mental health for adolescents and adults. So we really, really thank you, because we know that you're doing quite a bit of traveling now with Girls on the Brink just coming out. So we really appreciate you finding time in your schedule. And yeah, great. So Have a good day and we'll stay in touch. And we're gonna take a 15-minute break. It's 10:33. Bye, Donna.
Thank you.
Bye. If everybody could be back at 10:48. It's 10:33. Did I get that right? My math is not 10:40.